All right, Bruce, take it away.
Hey, well, hi everybody. Welcome to our APMM Academy meetup on making a model shop. Well, I just came up with that right now. We can use that in the future. And we're going to talk about how our three panelists pretty much made their model shops. Um, we have Charles Overy is the owner and director of LGM, and he's in Minturn, Colorado. And he has been a past president and board member of the APMM. And you might have seen his bio information on one of the earlier posts. He headed the effort to build a rep rap machine at our Boston conference, which was successful with many swear words and tears and late nights, but it happened. It turned on and it moved around a little bit, and then the conference ended. So they put it in a box and shipped it off to our award winner from Bemidji State University. And then Dean Zoyas is one of the two principals of Zoyas Creative with his wife, and they are in the Detroit, Michigan area. And I'm hoping if he has board experience in the APMM, he'll say something. Same with Nick, because I don't remember, and I haven't been in the board for since it started, so I don't know. And then Nick Duffage is the owner and lead model maker of Dogfish Dimensional Concepts, and he is in Blue Springs, Missouri. So what I thought would happen next is each panelist will spend a couple minutes introducing themselves, and then we have some questions ready, but anyone can ask questions whenever they'd like. And if you don't want to raise your hand and ask a question, you can put it in the chat, and then I'll read it and ask the question when there's a break in the action. We intend to go to at least one, and people often want to stay late and talk longer, but if you have a hard stop at one, say something so we can be sure to wrap things up and decide about another topic or a future meetup before everyone goes. So take it away, Charles.
Wow, I get to lead off. Um, yeah, I started a company. It was not a model shop at the time. After I left the aerospace and defense industry, where I was, that was my first quote unquote big job. And a lot of what I started was a reaction against what I had seen in aerospace and defense that I didn't like. So I wanted to start a small, nimble company, and I wanted to start it where I wanted to live, up in the mountains. And really went around. Part of the reason why I like to do things like this is because I really went about it the wrong way, and bought some equipment from a company that was closing its doors, some laser cutters back then, and said, well, I'm a smart guy. I can make something using this equipment. And I actually think that that story is pretty appropriate to the age, because I think there are a lot of people right now, who say they love 3D printing and might have a couple of 3D printers, and they want to go out on their own and start a company. And so they're looking for a product to make. And while I think you can start a company that way, I think it's a difficult way to go about starting a company. So we've been as big as 13 people. We're now at 4 people, mainly because we like having it smaller. It's more fun. We used to have, somebody who was in 3D printing, and someone who was in the wood shop, and somebody who, a couple of designers. And that wasn't really as fulfilling for everybody as, making your own thing. So that's where we are now. We've been doing this for, wow, over 25 years. We've made a lifestyle out of it, and it's certainly been a rewarding and interesting career. So there I am.
Thanks, Charles. How about Dean?
Unmute myself here. So I'm Dean Zoyce. I'm Vice President of Zoyce Creative Group. We've been in the business 29 years. Like Charles, we have more of an architectural model shop, leaning towards developer work, although we've been getting more into commercial work for Dell, Google, and Amazon lately. So moving a little bit away from architectural and moving more into I wouldn't really call it product because that's not really what we do. It's really still more architectural model making. Not unlike Charles, I started my studio organically with my ex-business partner. We were both in-house model builders at Smith Group, which is a major architectural studio, one of the oldest architectural studios in the country, and they're headquartered here in Detroit. We saw an opportunity. I was 25, he was 50. We saw an opportunity, and we were both getting laid off, as a matter of fact. So he got laid off first, started off with our first job, and then I followed him soon after. But we grew our studio organically, grew it from just the two of us to then realizing that there's some more work out there, added some subcontractors, and then just grew it one person at a time. He sadly passed away many years ago. I merged with my wife's business, which was more an architectural illustration and marketing firm. We now have 20 people, which is really a lot of managing. That's not really what I got signed up for. I really wanted to be a model maker. But my studio, the model shop, we have 8 people. So we've kind of grown organically from 2 or 3 people up to 8 over the past 29 years through multiple iterations. I know that this is a question later on down the road, but we can get to the financial end of it about starting a company organically. But I'll leave that for the next set of questions that Bruce is going to ask.
You're not going to give us your secret background, the little known fact about Dean's voice?
Oh, there's a rumor that I was in a rock and roll band that was signed to Mercury Records, and got to tour around and got to screw around in the late 90s and early 2000s. As a matter of fact, the model shop was really just a way to make money when I came back from being on the road, truth be told. So I also, like Charles, don't recommend doing that, doing it sort of organically and haphazardly. But I think I got serious about it at about 2000, 2001 when I met my girlfriend, now wife. Cut my hair, sold the van, and got a little bit more serious about my career.
Well, thanks, Dean. And Nick.
Yeah, so I'm Nick DeHage. I own DDC. We're I'd say probably 50-50 split between architecture and product model shop just outside of Kansas City. I got my start in probably 2000, 2001, kind of straight out of college there. It used to be a strictly architectural model shop in downtown Kansas City. And I worked there for a number of years, and the owner, it was kind of right during the middle of the recession. The owner was looking to retire and wanted to sell the business to me, which I hadn't really considered before, but kind of that idea got a hold of me. But the price did not. That was the part that I didn't like. And so I thought, as much as I liked the owner and respect him as kind of a mentor, I thought I could do it much cheaper. And so I basically started with like a cheap 3D printer and have built it up organically ever since then. And actually, it was really kind of awkward when the owner of the previous model shop went out of business and kind of somewhat retired. I ended up buying a lot of equipment from him anyway, super cheap. And there was another model shop in town that I picked the bones of as they were closing down. So I kind of merged those two shops into my own, and it's kind of where we're at now.
Which studios were those, Nick?
Say again.
Which studios were those?
The name of the shop that I worked for was Omni Models.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, a group, I don't know, 3 or 4 people broke off from Omni to create the model shop from, it was HOK Sport at the time, and which then became Populous. And so Populous and Omni were kind of cut from the same cloth, and those are the 2 shops that I kind of scavenged and kind of pieced back together into my shop. So in a weird kind of roundabout way.
Cool story.
Yeah. So there's probably anywhere between 3 to 5 of us here on a given day, depending on kind of the workload. So kind of similar to Charles's size. I think it's a good size. Any more than like at Omni we had up to 15, and it was a little too much. I prefer the smaller crew.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. Appreciate the introduction. For those just joining, our three panelists have just introduced themselves, and we'll be taking questions. I have some questions ready to go. Anyone can ask questions whenever they like. You can raise your hand. You can pipe up if you see a break in the action. You can also put them in the chat, and then I'll read them and ask them. And we have something in the chat right now, and that is, oh, Kenneth has to leave at 1. So, but he's not on the panel. So, haha, we'll keep going if Kenneth leaves. Sorry, Kenneth. So, well,
No worries, Bruce.
hinted,
Thanks.
Charles hinted at Dean. No, someone. Oh, yeah, I think it was Dean was saying that you wanted to share your financial insight, and that is one of the first questions. So,
Yeah.
since you're ready to go, let's unleash that one.
Yeah, so I was actually in the process in 1999 of buying out my business partner. I was trying to grow the studio, trying to figure out if I could buy a laser cutting machine. Similar to Nick and similar to Charles, I was sort of doing it organically. In 1999, there was really no 3D printing to speak of. So I asked my dad for a loan to not only buy out my business partner, but also buy my first laser cutting machine. So my mom and dad gave me 10 grand, which is really a lot of money back in 1999 to get going. My dad is also an entrepreneur. He had a business at the time. So 10 grand was about a month's worth of revenue, which I think we were really kind of leaning on a bit of a shoestring budget back then. But I know that if there are some people today in the chat that are more MBA minded, like Charles, you really should have a better number. Let's call it 3 months of income as a starting as a starting nut to get started, and that might be without the equipment leases or without the equipment costs. Only because the challenges that you'll face that we found quickly were staffing issues and downtime, right? So you're not really working anything higher than 85% capacity, which I now realized after 29 years in the business is that we can't even get past 85% efficiency. And you realized at that time, or I realized at the time, wow, that's a lot of money. So I wound up using it for payroll. I used it for some equipment purchases, and I wound up eating up that money very, very, very quickly. But then we were fortunate enough in 2000s and 2001, right before the first recession, we were pretty fortunate to have enough work coming our way for a good solid 2 years to be able to sock away some cash. And I did note from Nick and a little bit from Charles, we all sort of started our shops similarly, right, in a sort of organic way. It was table saw, laser cutting machine, a bunch of hand tools, that kind of thing. Didn't buy my first spray booth, I don't think, until about 2005, which I'll note to this whole group is really dangerous to do, especially in Detroit, where you have winter to consider. So we were doing a lot of spraying with the door open and with the big overhead garage door open. It's not very safe. So we definitely wouldn't recommend doing it the way that I did it. But I did do it on a shoestring budget. We're in a better place today. But I certainly would have loved to have gotten a loan. I'm just not sure if there's any bank that would have been willing to give a loan to a young architect who was only 2 years out of working at an architecture firm. I really didn't have any credit to speak of. So doing it organically and doing it through my parents loaning me some money was probably the only way that I was able to do it.
Hey, thanks, Dean. Would anyone else like to jump in with their money issues? And Charles and Nick, obviously, you can say as much detail as you want, but anyone else who has an insight can also chip in.
I think what Dean said is super important whether you start organically or whether you go bigger from the get-go. What I failed to realize, and even after I did while I was or after a couple of years, I went back and got my MBA on an afternoon evening program, and that helped a lot. And we did some financial modeling and this kind of stuff. But I think one of the things that is really difficult to deal with is variability. As Dean said, it's hard to get up above 85% of your total capacity. And I think we keep talking about not selling more, but selling smarter. If we could find a way to fill the gaps in our schedule, that would do more to our profitability than selling more. And that's the real problem, is that, you know, for us, we do a lot of resort industry work, and we are historically very quiet in January and February. So what do? I mean, do you let your talent go? Do you furlough people, or do you just accept the fact that January and February is your innovation time, is your time when you go out and revise the website and do your marketing and do all those overhead tasks, but it's super expensive. So you do need to plan that variability, and the bigger your ticket, the bigger that variability could be. I mean, if your average ticket is $40,000 and you don't win one of those, or you don't win a couple of those, or you slow down, or there's a recession, all of a sudden you've got 18 people on staff or something like that. You know, you've got to be pretty cutthroat. So I think variability is one of those things that's really difficult to plan for.
Thanks, Charles.
We've got a question on the chat too.
Yeah, they were going to ask about clientele, and that was a question for everybody I had on the list. So I was going to get to that. Oh yeah, and Dean mentioned that should be on there. How do you find customers? And yeah, I was ready to ask that one, but I would like Nick to mention the money situation, if you wouldn't mind, to get that one sewn up.
Yeah, there's always money situations. Money issues, more like. It's the getting that first piece of equipment, I think was the hardest part for me. I actually had started a small screen printing company with a guy that I had worked with, and we did just super small, like point of sale screen printing garbage for a company here in town. And that was kind of my seed money to start the model shop. So if I hadn't had that, or if there hadn't been some avenue to have a loan to get that first nice laser cutter, I don't know how you do it, because that's kind of the first big hurdle, I think. At least it was for me.
Oh, thanks. That's a good one. I'm just gonna make a note about that so I remember. And okay, now the next question was about establishing your clientele, because you can run around and poach clients off of your former employer, but sometimes you get in trouble for that. So that's not the most straightforward, easy way to do it. You at least have to be sneaky if you're going to do that. So it helps if your former employer went out of business, so they won't mind. But how would you say you approach that? And did you think that was a successful method? And really, any one of you three can start.
I can start if that's fine.
Sure.
In the 2000s and the 90s, it was about more of a regional approach. I was going around architecture firms in the Detroit area, trying to meet with architects. Wasn't aware that developers were the ones holding the key, driving all the money. But I was trying to leverage my business through architects, and then realized that there was bigger markets in Washington, D.C. and Miami and New York, and tried to go to the major markets. I started doing some cold calls to architects. I would ask architects in town if they knew architects out of town. I was kind of crafty in that way. I was probably very transparent about it, to be fair, but then realized that that is a lot of work, right? Doing cold calls, trying to be in different cities that you don't live in, it's hard to do. So I'm pushing more these days towards internet, trying to get some SEO, search engine optimization, so that our website pulls up before Charles's and before Nick's. Be clear. And I'm spending way more money than Nick and Charles apparently in that regard, because I do show up before them. It's a bit of a pay for play, sadly, to get, higher in the search engines, but it's not the only way to get business. I am still doing a lot of networking. I am still doing a lot of cold calls and leveraging through current assets in my Rolodex. So it's constant. And one of the reasons that Charles was mentioning, and I think Nick can probably attest, is that the reason you can't get past 85% is because I'm part of the overhead now. I'm no longer in the model shop, which is sad, because I really actually started this business so that I could be creative and have fun and play on a table saw and play with 3D printers and laser cutting machines. But I'm stuck in this bedroom or down in my first floor doing meetings half the time, more than half the time, and then the other half of the time trying to market. So I think that there's other avenues for getting your word out organically, as well as through paid search engine optimization. And I'd love to hear from Nick and Charles and maybe others on other ways of advertising or getting the word out.
I think, I mean, obviously it's changed a great deal from when I started to get the first customers in the late 90s and early 2000s, as Dean did. But I think the fundamentals haven't changed, and that is that you've really got to believe in your product. You've got to believe that your product is one of the best, and so that it gives you the confidence to go out there and sell it. I had bought this laser cutting equipment. I had tried to do a couple of different things with the laser cutting equipment. One of them, and I had a notebook, and one of the last ideas was engrave skis or make architectural models. And I chose make architectural models instead of engraved skis. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. And at that time, up in the resort area, you had to have a physical model to get through your design review, to get your entitlements to build. And so it was a home run, because there was a building boom, and literally the architects needed to outsource whatever they could outsource. So I made a model and I went door to door, literally banging on office doors, and I said, look at my great work. And it wasn't that great, but it was good enough. But whether it's door to door, whether it's direct email, whether it's calling friends, whether it's calling past employers, you've got to believe in your product enough that it gives you the confidence to go out and do it. And you've got to be hungry in order to really want to get out there. And because selling is it's a hand-to-hand sport. And I think a lot of us, me definitely, didn't start a model shop because you want to go out and sell. You start a model shop because you want to build models, and you think it's going to be rewarding, and you want to do the craft, like Dean said. But if you're not comfortable getting out there, and you're not proud of your product, it's going to be a hard go.
Nick, are you the salesperson now, the unwilling salesperson too?
Yeah, completely unwilling. Yeah, that is my weakest point. I can't stand doing it, but it's a necessary evil. It sounds like the other two, like my strong suit is to be in the shop, which is why I don't like having a lot of people, because the managerial and the sales side is not what I enjoy. I want to be, I like, I kind of like when a project initializes, like once somebody knows that they want a model and they get a hold of you, I like it from there on, and kind of being the point contact with the person I like. But finding that person is not pleasant for me. So and that's kind of reflected. Our website is horrible. I haven't spent a dime on it since I got the domain, which was just so I could have an email address. And so aside from that, the only money we've spent on marketing per se is just an initial batch of like really fancy folders and photos that we sent out to a bunch of architects here in town. And once they kind of knew about us, it's all been word of mouth. And so I haven't had to do a lot of the hard, like cold calling or the door-to-door sales exactly. I need to. It's definitely my personal weakest spot. But I don't, short of hiring a salesperson, which I don't want to do either. Um, I've just been relying on the word of mouth with existing customers.
We did try hiring a salesperson. It was a disaster, an outside salesperson, and it was, they got us into some difficult situations because obviously their goal is to sell. And that I would not recommend that.
And I also have some experience. My wife's team, branding and strategy and digital website design for developers, architects, generally speaking, real estate developers. She did have to hire a salesperson because she's also a reluctant salesperson herself. So now we have two people on that. It's not a nightmare. It's just it's expensive. Jenna's doing great, but Amy could definitely use some help from Jenna in terms of bringing in more leads, because once you have 20 people, you have to keep that engine rolling. So we're at the other end of that spectrum. We have hired salespeople and it's working, but it's just expensive. And then my wife and I are both lead sales, lead generation at our company. But bringing in that monthly nut is a scary prospect, if I could be so transparent to everybody here on the call.
Yep, we appreciate that. That's all the model makers talking amongst themselves. That's important for us to learn. I had thought of a question about applications for helping you, and then at that same moment, Paul put one in the chat, and he'd like to ask that live. So I think that's a pretty good segue. If Paul wants to unmute and
Yeah. Hey guys, wow, it's perfect timing because all three of your stories, I'm getting that thread of, starting the business, and now you guys are, commiserating about the parts that you don't like about where you're at. So thanks for leading right into me. It's kind of a two-part, I'd like to know, when you made the decision, that you were going to do this startup, whatever path you guys took that led you, to start the business, for yourself. Did you, back at that point in time or that period of time, did you have any thoughts of doing business education before doing so, to trying to understand more about some of the issues of where you're at right now, to be able to have some foresight into where that might have led to, so that, that's the first part of the question. And then the second part would obviously, that's a big theme of what this conversation is about, what, would be your thoughts now looking back after that and suggestions.
So Paul, you're asking, like, did we actually get any education about starting a business? Is that the question?
Yes, and to what degree did you do that, and what were some of the methodologies that you tried to educate yourself?
I didn't do it until I was halfway through, and until I'd been at it for a while, and I realized I couldn't understand a balance sheet, and I couldn't understand what my accountant was doing. I had a degree in engineering, but the finance stuff did not make sense, and so I went back to school, and it was just it sort of fell into my lap. They local university offered a nighttime MBA, and that was probably more than I needed. But of course, I joined the APMM, and that was sort of fundamental. And I also joined while I was a part of SME Rapid, the early rapid prototyping conference that still exists. But I think I did also go to some SBA, Small Business Association meetings down in Denver, and they had some retired executives who would review what you were doing. That was called SCORE at the time. I don't know whether that program still exists.
It does. As a
does,
matter of
yeah.
fact, I know a couple of SCORE individuals. So
Yeah. So I think whatever you do, however you get some information, if you don't have some basic business background, whatever you can do is going to help you as much as learning about the latest rapid prototyping machine.
So Paul, I also did find SCORE along the way. I can't remember if it was like 2007, 2008. I at one point, probably the same point Charles realized it, I said, man, I really wish I would have gone for my MBA, or I really wish I would have stayed with construction law when I was in architecture school. Finished with my architecture degree, had no knowledge on how to run a business except for my mom and my dad running their, automotive repair shop. So it was a bit of, for the last 29 years, it's really been just really sort of MBA by fire. And, but I really, honestly, at the point I'm at now, I'm like reviewing contracts and being legal. Like I'm on in-house legal at this point. I really would love to have had, some legal background or stayed with those architectural law classes that I skipped out of or didn't want to take. But along the way, when you find business consultants or you find free business consultants like SCORE, when you work with folks that can help your business, it's a lifeline for sure. And then of course you have to realize when you're not good at something, like Charles said about balance sheets. I mean, obviously you're going to have an accountant or an in-house person or an out-of-house person do your accounts receivable and your accounts payable. I mean, I'm good at it, but it's not what I'm meant to do, and we hire that out now in-house. So all of our contracts are reviewed, and then all of our accounts payable and all of our accounts receivable goes through two people that handle it for the entire company. But back in the day, when I didn't have that person, that was me. I was doing all of those hats that Nick was lamenting about, and Charles, I'm sure, is doing himself. I tried to grow it organically, so I wound up taking off certain hats over the last couple of years, last 10 years, trying to lean on more people in-house and out-of-house to help us with those.
Nick, have you used or are you using any business education or something like that?
No, it's all been trial by fire, kind of like Dean was saying. So everything I've learned has been because I did it the wrong way first. And honestly, if I had known any more about business when I started this thing, I would have run for the hills. It just
Now wait a second, Nick. We can't get to this part until 155. This
Yeah.
is the part where we don't want to scare people yet. It's still early
okay.
in the phone call.
Yeah.
We're trying not to lean away from having people start jobs.
Right. I mean, it was all fine, is what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's good to learn. Education is good.
A lot of cities, and this is not a question for people to answer, but I'm just mentioning, I went to a program when I lived in Birmingham for a year. I took a 9-week, once or twice per week, co-starters class, co-starters. And that's a subsidized program. If you demonstrate need, you can pay almost nothing to take it. And it's mostly just getting a lot of mentorship about how you can talk yourself into starting a business, and you do get some basics on accounting and things. It's kind of like, do you understand this? If you don't, you gotta learn more. But we want to put it out there that it's something to do. So I found that really helpful, and I started a business and didn't really use it, but it was really, it made it a lot more transparent, and it also alerted you to lots of government helpful things. And I think they probably mentioned the SCORE program, but the SBA has tons of things to help you. And I was going to get around to asking about resources you used. I think, yeah, there's no new questions. So that was kind of another one. When I was talking to our 3 panelists about doing this, I think it was Charles mentioned, thank God for the APMM when I was doing some of this stuff, because they were invaluable, and he's actually been invaluable to the APMM. I mean, just as far as being engaged on the mile, and people would ask their questions, he would answer them from his experience. So in addition to the APMM, which you can cite if you'd like, any other good resources that you found were really helpful? And the SCORE program too?
Well, I'll start that one off. So that's a great question, Bruce, by the way. When I met Richard Coleman, who was past president, also had, I think his studio was 30 or 40% architectural. I found in him a mentor, a friend, somebody that could help guide my business. He also introduced me to Charles, and he said, you should talk to Charles along the way. Between Charles and Richard Coleman, I've really found that the APM was super useful and super helpful for businesses like ours that can come to an agreement on, like Charles was saying at the beginning of this call, we are within 1% on a really huge estimate for 4 models down in Miami. It's interesting when you can grow your shop organically and then talk to people along the way that had similar experiences. That's a huge takeaway for me for this call, at least, is that I wouldn't have not have been able to run my business without having direct access to Charles and Richard throughout the years to be able to bounce ideas off of us. Hey, did you similar experience, or did you have this, or did you have that? Of course, I met my wife in 2002, and I had her to bounce ideas off of about how to run a business. But that resource with the APMM and the generosity that Richard and Charles had shown in their time proved to be highly valuable and highly useful. I hope I can do that to some capacity for anybody that's interested, or if I can somehow give back in that way to that generosity those two gentlemen showed me. And I think I met Lisa Jamiti along the way. She was, somewhat receptive to the idea of chatting with me. And of course, she's a direct competitor, so there's always that challenge as well. Charles and I always looked at it as a bit of a game. Same with Richard and I too. It's like, oh, did you bet on this too? So it is a game. I mean, business is actually a bit of a game, right? There's a little bit of a moving of chess pieces, if you will. So I do appreciate the camaraderie, and I've always appreciated the APMM for being able to meet both in-house model makers along the way, as well as independent shops.
Well, we have a good soundbite to post on the web as a publicity
Oh,
for the APMM now. Thank you so much.
Shit, you said this was being recorded. Damn it.
Yeah.
I should not have said that so quickly.
Well, but you said very nice things. The thing I watch out, you see the bad things later on. Charles and Nick, do you want to jump in on the resource question?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, it was Craig Martin at Archetype, who was an APMM member, and then Todd Britton, was at Fentress at the time and is now at Triba. And they played the same role that Richard and I played for Dean. And again, so you're not all alone. Thinking you're all alone. The other groups that I think are particularly good right now, I was involved with SME Rapid when it was getting started. And that was pretty transformational for my career, but also AMUG, the association, what's AMUG? Manufacturer Users Group, Additive Manufacturing Users Group. And I think they're a good group as well. But you have to find some, maybe it's AIA, or maybe it's Industrial Designer Group. Maybe it's, if you're getting into scanning, there's a scanning group, but whatever your area of expertise is, find some professional societies that are involved in that, and join at least 2, get involved in at least 2, and give back to those groups, and they will give more to you than you've given to them.
Yeah, I was going to say again, you certainly did give back. I mean, even besides being on the board, there are quite a number of people in the APMM were really active when the mile was active. We haven't seen the forum get that busy, but all the things were in one place on the mile, so there was a good bit of churn. Plus, there wasn't really the internet yet, so a little bit more dependent on each other for help rather than going on looking what Adam Savage had to say about it. So, Nick, resources?
Mostly just the APMM. I mean, I sound like a broken record, but I mean, it was really critical, especially in kind of the early years. We joined it. I think I joined it pretty much the same year I started this shop, and the model shop that I had worked at was a member, but just the owner was a member, and he didn't let any of the rest of us in on the secret society meetings that went on. But yeah, it was super helpful, and specifically the mile I remember was really helpful back in the day.
You didn't miss much. It was just a bunch of people bitching about super glue, how it crazy is clear acrylic. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
You know, and I think conferences were generally pretty helpful. When we had business, well, for this topic, when we had business things to discuss, I did one about the perfect bid that was kind of tongue in cheek, and it had this weird long equation that was designed by the guy that wrote books about solving problems with math, like personal problems. And I can't think of that book or his name, but that's on the documents on our website in case you want to go look at it. And you would put in all these variables, you'd fill in the variables for all these different situations you had, like how dependent is your client on you, how dependent are you on your client, and that kind of thing. And it would poop out a number that you would add, that you could mark up or discount your quote by to be competitive. And he did a serious job of creating the variables or creating the equation, and we tried to do a good job of deciding what the variables should be. So when we had the workshop about it, people said, yeah, this whole thing is in theory useful. What you did was kind of silly, but it's not a bad idea. So you can go look at that if you want to.
Nice.
Just be ready to
Stuart.
do some algebra.
Well, speaking of some math, Stuart asked a question in the chat. What steps do you take to come up with a legitimate proposal on a project so that in the end you actually make some money? I love this question, so I'd like to take this one first.
Yeah.
So we chatted, the group of us chatted before we had this bigger group. And somebody taught me a very, very long time ago. It might have been my accountant, it might have been some other business owner. Hell, it might have been Charles or Richard. I don't even know. But there's a number floating around there for small business owners, medium-sized business owners, that you use a 3-time multiplier for your labor rate to come up with a proposal. When you're really hungry and you don't have a lot of work, and it's another recession of the 5 or 6 that we've all been through, you run that down to 2.5 and you try to make it up in volume. But a 3-time multiplier, let's say you've got a $30 an hour employee, that's $90 an hour. You know, are you really covering enough of your shop rate and your overhead and your soon to be accounts receivable, accounts payable person that you're going to hire? So you might start pushing that number up closer to 3.1, 3.2, and then you realize that you just lost a job to Charles Overy at LGM Model Shops, and then you have to run your number back down to 2.9 to try to stay competitive. So that's more of a, I just raise my left hand, that's more of a right hand approach. I'm sure, Charles, you went to MBA school at night. I'm sure there's probably a more specific way to do it. We've come up with a very complicated algorithm, recently hired a business consultant. He went through all of these equations. Basically, it's you take your overhead, you take the rate that your employees are making plus their burn rate, which is the insurance and the blah, 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 all this other stuff. And then funny thing is, you come down to this number at the bottom and it just spits out a number. It strangely looks like 2.9 or 3.1%, 3.1 multiplier. But that's why Kenneth shook his head in positive reaction, because that right-hand approach actually does work to, at the end, to Stuart's question, actually make some money in the end. Now, the trick of it is that you don't have your clients taking you on a bath for scope creep, which I just had with Dell, and I'm going to have again with Amazon. But it's really, you got to be cautious. So that's where the sort of writing good scope and writing good quotes and making sure that you're clear on what you're providing, and more importantly, what you're not providing. So that way you can manage to that number and not feel like you're going on a safari for scope creep. I know that that's a lot in a quick 2-minute synopsis, but starting with that 2.9 to 3.1 multiplier seems to come up in the end over the last 10, 15 years to actually start producing a profit number.
And you said that was you're adding that multiplier to like your staff's wages. Do you also have like an equipment running rate that you also multiply that? Like this CNC wants to have 20 bucks an hour or something?
So that's funny you mentioned that. So on the times when I've done a 3.1 multiplier and then did like a 25% increase on like 3D printing runtime and laser cutting runtime, I wound up losing jobs to Charles. So I wound up pulling back on that and making my multiplier a little bit less on shop equipment. But you know, if we can speak honestly, there's probably a going shop rate here number for multiple people, and it probably ranges anywhere from 90 bucks an hour to 130 bucks an hour, even shit, if we're being generous, 150 bucks an hour. But the moment where you start looking at 130 and 150 and you start competing around the country with shops with less overhead or bigger shops with higher volume or overseas, you wind up coming into a risk of trying to charge more. And to what Charles said earlier at the beginning of the call, trying to work smarter in that numbering game. That's still a hard equation to beat. You still got to stay competitive. You still have to be careful. And it seems so obvious to my staff. They say, Dean, why don't you just charge more? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'll do my best. Thanks for asking that question. And yet again, why don't I just charge more? I would love to do that, but the reality is that I'm in direct competition with some very nice people on this phone call.
And to answer Stuart's question, I think very, very briefly, don't be afraid. Don't give it away. I mean, and that was what Craig Martin came to me, and we were making a $30,000 model for $8,000 at the time, and he said he came literally by our shop because he'd lost some jobs to us and said, "Let's go through your numbers. You know, I'm a competitor, but I also don't want you to starve because it gets cold up here in the winter." And he, you know, basically, if you're not doing that 3x multiple, you can, as Dean has gone through this exercise, we went through the same exercise and we said, you know, what is the electricity cost on the mill? How much work in progress materials do we have on the 3D printer that we're never going to get back? You know, how much time do we spend servicing the 3D printers? And you put all of those factors in, and you do get to this multiple that's somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5. And so we stopped doing that because it was an exercise that took a lot of time and wasn't a lot of fun. But it did make us confident that if we're going to be a professional shop, that you need to charge professional shop rates. And when you lose a job to somebody down the street who just bought a Glowforge and you know, a Prusa, that's going to happen. But you've got to be confident enough in your product that you can move forward with professional rates. Otherwise, it is going to be a pretty tough go, and you know, you might also have to have a job where you're asking, do you need a cart?
If you guys know Art Headland, Art Headland, who taught the model making program at Bemidji, on the first day of the first model making course that you took with him, he said, you're going to be out there in theory making money at this. I think he said either 80 or 85% of your costs are labor. And if you're just careful about considering everything, you don't need to bother yourself with materials, utilities, and that kind of stuff, because the work, if you've got the work sorted out, the other stuff the other numbers will take care of themselves.
And I totally agree with that, Bruce. I mean, that's what we realized a number of years ago, was that the 3D printers and the laser cutter and the little bits of paper and plastic and now you got to be a little careful with 3D printing, I think, with the cost of that now. But we're really essentially selling man hours, and if we can break even on the rest of it, because we don't want to get into a fight where we're lowballing 3D printing because there's too much capacity right now in the market. So there's always going to be somebody who's going to shoot lower than you are. But you know, there's nobody who's going to shoot lower than you are on your labor hours, on your expertise. If somebody likes working with one of our project managers, they're going to pay for one of our project managers. Unless we screw it up, they're not going to go to Dean because they know us and they want, what we're offering, which is us.
Nick, do you want to jump in on it? Oh, sorry, Charles, are you still answering? Okay, Nick, do you want to jump in with the thoughts on that number or any other thing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about selling yourself versus your tools or your tool time. We've kind of finding that shop rate is kind of key, but it's also kind of nebulous. And it changes from job to job. And like we've got a really elaborate spreadsheet that tracks everything. It sounds like Dean and Charles have kind of the same thing. Like we've we've got this spreadsheet that we spent a lot of time figuring up. And if you plug everything in and do it all right, it spits out, basically that same number. So it um, it kind of it goes back to that thing you were talking about, Bruce, with how much you want the job and how hungry you are, where your actual shop rate lands. And so that can kind of be a tricky thing, is that it's not necessarily a set in stone type of thing. Um, you know, we have an occasional job where we run stuff by like purely by machine time, but uh, the gut check against that is kind of just the standard hourly rate. It's like that 3 times multiplier, and then you can also gut check it against the big long spreadsheet. But they all kind of three say the same thing, but you don't end up charging as much for like running a little bit on the laser as you do a super high detailed job. I kind of losing my point there, but it varies, is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Well, that's good information. Everyone's come down on 3, so that's a big time saver for all you guys going forward. And it's certainly as a gut check number. I was
Stuart,
going to ask. Go ahead.
I would make sure too that I think it was mentioned briefly by Dean, but the biggest erosion for that also tends to be not scrap or all of these things, but it tends to be not controlling scope creep and making sure your inputs are right. And that's actually the biggest way we lose money off of that is, misspecking a job or misunderstanding a job with the client, or them not sending you what you thought you were getting, or them wanting more, and of course you wanting to provide a better product and spending extra hours on it.
Yeah, we even in an internal shop at Zeba, we had that where the model shop would say it's going to take this much to do this level of work, and they would finagle it. We don't want it to cost that much. Well, then what's going to happen? Do we get more time or lower the quality or what? And sometimes they were shocked, I say, that they had to consider that. But well, that's if we were charging you money and you had to pay us, then that's what we'd have to charge you. So we have to work together to make it happen. And explaining very carefully to the client what they were getting for that was, as Charles said, key. Anyone at any time can put their hand up or ask a question in the chat. There's a question in the chat. Let me just have a look at that. Oh, it's Kenneth leaving. Bye, Kenneth. I was going to ask if it's kind of on the related to resources, but have any automated things, I mean, even chat to help write a proposal or to write a pitch, chat GPT, or any kind of program to help with accounting. Has anyone tried that and found success or failure?
Yeah, I went to the APMM biannual meeting, and I was reminded that AI can write microcontroller Arduino. And I had forgotten that, and I saved myself probably 5 times the price of going to that APMM meeting by using AI to write some Arduino code, and had a lot of fun doing it for a lighting controller. So that was a great win. And we actually then went and put Gemini. I don't like it quite as much as ChatGPT, but we put Gemini on everybody's Google subscription in the office, and it's just asking Gemini things like, what scale was the Cornerstone model at? And it chunks around for a while and searches all of your email and spits out information and saves searching the email. So I'm a big fan of some sort of AI as part of your business practice. I think it can save you some time, and it's well worth the cost of the subscription. I would be very cautious about other subscriptions. You can start spending $24 on this and $50 on that and $90 on the other. And I think you've got to be pretty selective, that make sure that they're bringing you the value that you're spending on all of those processes. I think you need a really good customer relationship manager, particularly if you don't want to be in sales. You've got to pick some sort of system to handle your quotes and make sure that you do get back to people. But I don't think that a lot of other systems are probably worth what you have to pay for them.
Thank you. Dean or Nick?
I've been hyper focused on automating my proposal process lately, using some things like Monday.com, using spreadsheets, trying to get away from spreadsheets so I can have things all in one place. With Monday, been writing some interesting, I don't want to call it code, it's not really the right word, but just automations within Monday that have been really key for us to manage the financial end. And then
Sorry,
from
what is that called? What is that
Monday
called?
Monday.com. I mean,
Monday,
there's
like
there's
the day of the week?
Trello, there's all kinds of different project management style type software, but we're also using it for project management. So we're tying in the proposal end to the project management, which has been really interesting lately. But it's not been without a whole bunch of back end automations and writing of things that don't exist. So, but I've been automating the proposal side of things too. Gathering up proposal images. I think Nick, you mentioned it earlier. Just having that stuff ready to go at a moment's glance, and then minor tweaks to my proposal as opposed to a full sale 4 to 6 or 7 hour proposal. I don't have, ain't nobody got time for that, as they say in Detroit. I don't have time to write 7-hour proposals anymore. Trying to win work, but still put in a reasonable effort and show the client that we've reviewed the scope of work and we understand the scope of work, and here's our best guess at a number. I will say this too, sort of openly. I haven't really been happy with just presenting just one number lately, because there are so many variables in quotes, and if we're going up against 2 or 3 competitors, I'm more happy lately with ranges. Charles, I think I just showed you that the other day, only because if there's unknowns, it really doesn't make sense to write a scope of work that is going to be not followed anyway. And it seems to be working. We're getting a lot more second calls and putting on short lists and things like that. So I've been pretty pleased with budget range proposals as opposed to hard numbers lately.
Well, interesting. That did not used to be the case, and I'm probably isn't in lots of industries where they don't like any ambiguity.
My clients don't like it. I'm not telling you something that you haven't already experienced. My clients don't like it. But
and your numbers are pretty tight, Dean. They're not plus or
Yeah.
minus 50%. They're plus or
Right.
minus. I think you have like 5%.
5%, 8% is where I usually land.
Yeah.
And then I stipulate that too. I'll say something to that effect. I'll say there are some unknowns. There are many things that are known, but there are some unknowns. This is our idea. This is what we're thinking, et cetera, et cetera. it's been successful. I won't say that it's not without its pushback, Bruce. I'll say that candidly.
I've got a question for Dean before we finish up, if that
Well,
works.
let
Yeah.
Nick answer that too.
Oh,
I think
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, as far as proposals, we don't have anything automated and we don't use AI for anything. So all our proposals are still, I say handwritten, but there's pretty robust templates in place that we use. So it's a lot of plug it in the pertinent stuff and make sure you got the right client typed into the header type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but the range concept, we've been kind of experimenting with that too. And I think as long as you explain it to the client, like why it could range, that helps them swallow it a little better. And largely they're the driver of the range to begin with. So as long as they know that range is on them, it kind of helps them to not creep as much. Yeah, I like that. I like that concept a lot.
Thanks. So Charles, you had a question for Dean, or Dean had one for Charles?
I had one for Dean, and it's sort of a lot of what I was thinking about preparing for this meeting and what we were talking about before is really what you're selling and how you enter into a marketplace. And I think a lot of people have asked this, and I think it's one of the things that's really unique about the APMM is there's small shops that are doing, pewter and castings. There are small shops that are doing gifts and micro models. I think we just happen to have 3 architectural shops on the call. But one of the things we found difficult with architectural models is that they're rarely required. They're usually optional. They're usually something that it's not core to the architect's business. So Dean, you said you were starting to change your product mix. Is that more a strategic realignment? Is that just something that's falling into your lap? Are you going to continue to move in a direction, towards bigger ticket items with bigger companies? And why are you changing your product mix?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I might be better off just sharing my screen just to show you what I mean by working outside of the architectural industry, but still working architectural. Is that allowed here, Bruce?
Yeah, I think Michael might have to let you be a co-host. He's saying okay with this mic muted, but there we go.
Okay. So what I mean by staying in architectural, but changing it up a little bit is these models that we're doing for exhibit and trade shows, and they've really been popular and they've been really successful. But moving animatronic little robots, and I assume you guys can see my screen.
Yeah.
While this is probably still architectural, it does lean more into exhibit, trade show, and maybe product modeling. And we're really having a lot of fun with it, and our clients seem to be drawn to it. So, but what I wanted to answer Charles's question directly was, the architects weren't really cutting it for me. They all wanted a model for $10,000. They wanted it in 2 weeks, and they wanted to stipulate what it looked like. And Nick, you could probably share in that, and I'm sure Charles, you can as well. When I realized that the developers were the ones holding the key, we start to try to, market ourselves directly to developers, because even though the architects are going to make the introduction, it's the developers are the ones that are, driving big dollars, and they're the ones doing amazing things with, city creation, in this case, Bedrock in Detroit, buying up 115 buildings in the greater downtown area. If that sounds like a lot of buildings, it's absolutely a lot of buildings. So, when we start to get into this realm of being able to help at a broader scale, that might come from a referral from an architect, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're working for the architects directly, because they're all thinking of it in terms of their competitive approach. And that's not to say that I don't do that. We still do, a white 3D printed model for an architect from time to time, but again, they want it cheaper and cheaper, and they were not, necessarily willing to pay for it. When you're working directly for developers for, large scale condo developments and large scale commercial and university work, that's when you can really start to play in a bigger field and charge a little bit more, not necessarily a lot more, but just a little bit more. When you try to go to an architect and say, this is the model we're going to create for you, or your pitch to the developer, you know, they don't want this thing to cost more than 10 or 12 grand. And the reality is I can't make that for 10 or 12 grand.
Right. And I would really tend to agree. And that was actually, you know, if I was setting up a business plan today, I would not have focused my business on something that was optional.
Secondary and optional. Yeah, that's
Secondary and optional. I think, you know, if you want to look at the whole gamut of what can you make and how can you use your hand skills and how can you find something rewarding, be a little cautious about, you know, maybe a medical model or an aerospace model, or, you know, at least a trade show model. They've planned it in. They have to have that model in their trade show booth. Otherwise, you know, how are they going to get people in? It's part of their selling process. And like Dean,
right.
Where we've had the developer, where we're part of their process, that's really provided us with some good, strong business year over year, instead of this optional thing that's first to go in a recession or a time crunch or something like that.
Yeah, that was my realization in 2005, that the developers were the ones that were actually asking for these things. And to your point, I would focus more on an effort to go to where the money source is, and that depends on which industry you're in. Of course, this tends to lean more architectural, even with Nick's 50% background in architecture. Go to where the money is, you know, and see something that's more as a mandatory and less as an optional, to Charles's point.
There's also the business factor of don't let a middleman take part of your overhead away from you or part of your profit away. And
Yeah.
Even at Ziba, we were making models, and they used to just include the models in the cost of the project, and it was hidden, and the clients were ecstatic to have a nice model. And then the models, our shop became expensive, other shops became cheaper. We had to start outsourcing models when our shop couldn't do them fast enough, or we weren't big enough to make them fast enough, or didn't have capabilities in metalworking and stuff. And so a bunch of my time then was wrangling shops in Taiwan and other places to make models that before I was making. So even though I was in an in-house shop, I became the overhead person too. So but it was well when your model becomes a commodity, then you don't want someone between you and the end buyer, because all they're going to do is suck some money out of your profit margin.
Yeah. Or more importantly, with architects, they're the ones, in some cases, competitive to another architecture firm. They're going to the developer with this model. So that's why they need it under 10 grand, and that's why they need it in 2 weeks, and on we go. But, you know, the moment you realize that, okay, now they've sold this project, or this project's a go, well, this university or that group is going to need something for the sales process. But I'll tell you what, it has not been easy. Going back to how do you market yourself, that question, what steps do you take for advertising? Getting to the developers and getting to the money people has been absolutely not easy. And you have to keep working at it. So Nick, the reluctant salesman, Dean, the reluctant salesman, and Charles Overy, the reluctant salesman. It's constant. You have to constantly be trying to look for where the work is going.
Well, I hope this doesn't come as a horrible surprise to anyone and gets them in trouble, but it's 11 minutes after 1. So I promised that we would do some kind of wrap-up activity. One thing is, if anyone's interested, this could be another meetup, possibly. And if everyone seems like they would be interested in attending it, I'm not asking the panelists to repeat. Hopefully, one or two will. If someone doesn't, we could recruit from some other people here, or just dig around our other successful business people, like past president. No, I can't think of his name. Terry Wellman. So he's done the same thing, and he's in product transportation models. So that'd be kind of a bit of diversity. So are there lots of questions that are unanswered, even if you can't think of the questions right now? I don't know. Show of hands, or raise your hands, or raise your hand in the automatically, or just if your screen is on, your actual hand. think there's more?
Oh, there's 3 hands, 4 hands. Well, Charles, you already talked enough. Let's let Gary or Stu ask a question or.
Yeah, so, well, if no one has to leave, well, anyone that has to leave can leave. Mike might have to go back to work, but I think he could just leave the Zoom running. So no one has to take off right this very second. If there are, Alika's in for another one. Well, I guess we'll think about doing that then. Did Christopher or Stuart or Ryan, here's Stuart with a, oh, he has to leave. Or Gary, no, Gary. My thing is kind of small. Did you have a question? Nope. Any final thoughts? I guess we're not going to touch on the what disasters did you weather?
6 recessions,
Yeah,
Yeah.
recessions.
maybe more that I might not even know about.
Recessions.
Sounds about
Yeah.
Yeah, since the APM was founded, I think we've been through this about 6 times. 6 times in
Yeah.
30 years, every 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Bruce, I would propose maybe an interesting sidebar to this, or a different topic. It would be identifying your superpower. What do you love doing? What are you better at doing than anybody else that you know? And how do you turn that into either a business or furthering your career where you are? Because I think too often, and I was guilty of doing this, I thought, well, I'm a smart engineer, I need to get out and do it on my own. But I think that figuring out what you're good at and what you want to do in the context of a relatively esoteric business, might be an interesting sort of segue or movement from this purely business conversation into a skills identification and
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I found
I've got
like
to run as
managing-
well, actually.
Okay. Well then,
I'm gonna take a call, sorry, real quick. And so if anybody else, anyway.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Charles. Does anyone have anything further to add?
It's been some really good discussion today and some really thought-provoking, topics and whatnot. I think, for people that are in that position of, trying to make that decision, I think you guys have given them some seriously excellent points, to get them going in the right direction. So my only thought is just to really appreciate your time, all of you for, organizing this and participating in it. So
Yeah, thanks a lot, you guys. You're why the
My pleasure.
APMM is the awesome thing it is.
Absolutely.
all right, well, Bruce, I guess if you're all wrapped up, I'll end the meeting here in a sec and the recording. But did you have any final comments you wanted to make?
Nope. Thank you.
All right.
Michael, I wanted to thank you and Bruce for putting this together. You guys have done a ton of work to get this panel going, and certainly appreciate your insights. It's nice to know that there's people out there that are willing to help other people, as I found a good friend in Charles and Richard along the way. I know, Bruce, you've always been great to pop in, and Michael as well on the APMM and the Mile. So thanks again for keeping this thing moving, guys. It wouldn't, none of this would be possible, not just this, but none of this would be possible if it weren't for the generosity of your time.
Well, thank you,
Appreciate
Dean.
that. Thank you.
All right. Well, y'all have a great afternoon, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.